All right. Thank you and welcome everyone to the to our webinar on gap years, our gap year Q&A. We have with us tonight Marian Taylor, who is the owner and founder of Taylor the Gap LLC. Her website is taylorthegap.com. She is a gap year expert and she is going to talk all about the gap year experience. I'm going to pass it over to Marian to be able to share a little bit about her background and her story and how she got into this. And we're going to dive right into lots of questions. If you have questions for us, feel free to use the chat feature and we will answer them as we go. So Marian, want to give us a little bit of a background about you?
Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today to learn about all things Gap. I am owner and founder of Taylor the Gap. I started this about 8 years ago, and I come by gap years by my own personal experience as well as 2 out of my 4 children. I took a gap year way back in the medieval ages in 1979 and deferred from Middlebury College. I had a real interest in French, and I also wanted to ski, so I went to the University of Grenoble for a year. And then after college, I joined the Peace Corps and used my French in Senegal, West Africa, in a rural development program. And since that time, I have tried to kind of keep abreast of gap issues by vetting gap programs overseas, as well as participating in language programs. I've been trying to learn Spanish as an adult. So I tested one out in Antigua, Guatemala, as well as more recently in Cuenca, Ecuador. And then I spent some time vetting 2 programs in Gisenyi, Rwanda, working with women's co-ops, as well as in Moshi, Tanzania, teaching English as a foreign language to women. Out of my 4 children, 2 have taken gap years. My eldest daughter finished college early in December, and then she spent 3.5 months working as a preschool assistant in Khayelitsha, which is a township outside of South Africa, outside of Cape Town. And then my son, who really needed a gap year to kind of mature, he was a late bloomer, he spent his year working 3 different jobs, working in Moab for the fall, and then teaching snowboarding up at Keystone locally, and then working in the service industry at local restaurants for the remainder of his time. So that's a little bit about me. Professionally, I have a master's in social work, and I've worked in the field of social work for about 35 years with different nonprofits, both here in Colorado as well as in Africa. And that social work has come very much into play in terms of family dynamics, being the kind of the third party between parents and students, one wanting to do a gap year or not wanting to do a gap year. And that has been extremely helpful.
Wonderful.
So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, thank you so much. An incredible background for this line of work. So why is a gap year beneficial?
There are so many reasons to take a gap year, and so I'm just going to outline the major ones so I don't go on too long. One is certainly applied to me. I was extremely burned out after working very hard to get into college, and I was at an extremely hard school, especially with students taking multiple AP, IB courses. So it's a really good time to recharge their battery. In addition, it helps students really focus on what they want to study at college. Oftentimes, they're not quite sure why they're going to college, or they waste their freshman year kind of floating around. But I think it's a really good opportunity to test the waters, whether it be in an internship or exploring global health, shadowing an AIDS worker. So it can really help students choose a major or minor, or even develop interest in a certain club. In addition, it's a time for students to get off the traditional academic conveyor belt. Students have been kind of packaged from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And as we all know, it increases that pressure during junior and senior year even more. It's an opportunity to let go of all those obligations, whether they be school commitments, student government, mock trial, model UN, varsity sports, plays, drama, or family commitments or church commitments. So it's really an opportunity for students to slow down, to journal, to sketch, to really reflect. Mm-hmm. In addition, it's a great chance to really learn about themselves. 17, 18, 19-year-old students are really on the cusp of adulthood, and it's a time where they can become more engaged in their learning. They can be more proactive, take initiative rather than be passive observers. It can be hands-on learning, whether it be snorkeling or scuba diving to do some coral bleaching data collection, or it could be installing water filters in the Amazon. So it's very much hands-on. As well, it can be an opportunity to really explore a passion or a hobby or an interest. I had one student who loved the classical guitar, so she spent 3 months learning under a tutor in Spain the classical guitar. I had one student who was going on to Middlebury and he needed to race for a year and lower his points, so he went to a PG year in a local school back in Vermont. And it also can be an opportunity to really gain self-awareness, to learn about one's own limits, what your boundaries are, how do you interact in a group, how do you deal with adversity, how do you overcome challenges. And I think that self-learning is incredibly important in terms of navigating the social choices at college later on. And finally, I think it's a really important thing to get outside your own community, whether you do a GAP experience domestically or you do it internationally. I think it's super important to know, how other people live. Outside the United States, the majority of the world lives in very impoverished conditions. And I think we need to develop a global sensitivity around that, especially for our up and coming new generation of leaders. They need to have that global awareness. We're a very interconnected global society. So that's probably the last reason, in addition to learning some life practical skills. Mom and dad may not be there to do your laundry anymore, so you may have to figure out how to do your laundry. You may figure out how to have to cook or problem solve. You lose your passport, or budgeting if you're doing independent traveling on your own. So there's some really good practical life skills that can be gained as well.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. One term I just want to clarify for some families: PG year is a postgraduate year. Some private schools offer this for students who need to. A lot of athletes will do this to be able to improve their talents, or it helps with recruiting. But also, if I've had a couple of my own students that have gone on to postgraduate years where they just needed to bump up. They needed one more year to prepare academically for college and to bump up their GPAs and stuff. So that's awesome to see. That's a path to postgraduate experience. So there's so many different avenues to go, and we're going to get there in terms of all different types of options that are out there for gap year experiences, and they can be investing a lot of resources or very little resources, and we'll dive into that. But I want to ask you, before we get into that, are there any downsides?
There are very few downsides. I've never had a GAP student regret taking a gap year. I can name about 3. 1, college tuition inevitably goes up. So if you take a gap year, the following year, probably college tuition will go up. So that's 1. The second may be that student this has only happened once to me, change their mind about the college of their choice. They were going to X, Y, and Z college, but during the gap fall, they changed their mind and they applied to a different college. And oftentimes that is a better fit because they've learned a great deal about themselves and maybe what their interests are. Mm-hmm. And then thirdly, and this is very real, there may be an adjustment period when students come back in terms of re-entering the United States, in terms of reconnecting with friends, in terms of the transition, and more importantly, oftentimes adjusting to that freshman fall term. GAP students may feel much more mature than incoming freshmen because they've seen some real life issues, whether it be human trafficking, whether it be AIDS, whether it be malnutrition, whether it be devastation from an earthquake or a drought. They've seen some real world issues, and that can set them apart a little bit in terms of their thinking, in terms of their perspective. And so oftentimes it takes a little bit of an adjustment to kind of find who your friends are. I often recommend seeking out other GAP students or older students, or seek out courses in the area of interest that you became interested in during your GAP semester, or professors. But there is a little bit of an adjustment period, especially to that fall term.
Absolutely. And that's the study abroad experience I noticed too, even for my own self, that coming back and reacclimating is something that absolutely I can absolutely see that.
Yeah.
Um, so what are the myths out there? Are there myths that you hear about gap years?
Yeah, there are a few. One is gap years are for losers. This is the one I hate. Or for kids that couldn't get into college, or they didn't know what else to do. That is one. Another is, and this comes from parents, if you go on a gap year, you will never go to college. When in fact, gap year students, 90% go on to college, and they are much more focused, have a much better handle on what they want to study. Um, and another is gap years cost more than a year of college. And that is absolutely false. There are very affordable ways to, and we'll discuss this a little bit further, but there are very affordable ways to have a gap experience. And then lastly, gap years are for rich kids. There are many, many scholarships and grants and foundations and really creative social crowdfunding sites. So those are some of the myths that I am constantly battling against.
Wow, so much information I'm learning. This is awesome. This is great. So, what do colleges think about students doing gap semesters or gap years?
So that has come around to more and more thinking of this is a great thing. Over 3,000 colleges now allow deferments, which is a huge increase. Way back in the 80s, Harvard was Middlebury and Harvard were the only ones. But in addition to colleges allowing deferments, there are now colleges that have created their own gap years, like Princeton has a bridge year, UNC has a global fellowship year, Elon, AU, Northeastern, they have all designed a gap semester on the front end. And clearly, colleges are recognizing the value in students coming to college much more focused, much more ready to study, and they really enrich the classroom discussions because they've had real life experience that they can add to the participation in the class. And I think colleges understand that now. So I think there's a real favor towards a gap year, but I recommend to students who are thinking of doing one to not include it in their application. Get into the college first, make sure that they allow deferments, and then request a deferment May 1st. Don't include it in the application.
Hey, Marion, that is brilliant because that's exactly how I advise too.
Yeah.
Can you define deferment? There's a parent that wants to know, what is deferment? What does that mean?
A deferment is a policy, and every college has a different one. So it's really best to go to their admissions link on their website. They all vary, but generally a deferment is allowing a student to put off their year of college till the following fall without any penalty. You can put down deposit, you can hold the place, and generally you will not lose the scholarship unless you win the lottery or something. So unless their economic situation changes. So that's what a deferment is. Some colleges have caveats of not allowing you to get academic credit. Middlebury College would not allow me to get any credit from the University of Grenoble. So there are some conditions around that, and every college is different.
Do you see that most colleges on the deferment do not allow you to do classes at all, or you just can't take any classes for credit?
Generally the latter. You can't take, because it also can affect your entrance. Are you coming in as a transfer? Are you coming in as a sophomore? And then that gets complicated. You're better off entering with a fellow freshman as your roommate, or being allowed to do the orientation. It gets a little tricky, and I think that's one of the reasons they do it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So the point that Marion just made about the best advice is to hold off on communicating with the college that you're going to do a gap year until you've been accepted and you've been enrolled and you are set to go. Check it all. You're set, you're confirmed, you're ready to enroll is the most helpful. And I will tell you, since there's a lot of parents on this webinar right now, your student is going through a process. And it is such a process of self-discovery and change. And so I also see that there's some, and you probably see this too, student is said, I'm not going on a gap year. And then all of a sudden in June, right after they graduate, they are, or there's a lot of changes that can happen. So it's also for that reason, really important to kind of hold off on the commitments until, you know, and wait until you're enrolled and then take that path. I agree.
Although with that, Stephanie, is oftentimes the college will have a date. Oftentimes it can be May 1st or June 1st, where they have to let them know that they're deferring. Because then it enables the college to let those people off the wait list and give them their
sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Good to know. Great to know. So talk about what are the tend to be the most popular types of gap year experiences?
Well, right off the bat, the one comes to mind is this is fairly typical, is the 3-month semester program. It usually includes travel, cultural immersion, maybe language immersion if it's in a foreign country, a homestay, and learning service or community service. And that generally runs kind of fall and spring, so September to December, and then late January, early February to May. That is the most popular that I have found. And I often recommend it to students off the bat on the front end of their gap year, because it's a really good launch pad to gain some traveling skills, some kind of street savvy, to learn how to be cognizant in a foreign city about your passport, about your money, about your iPhone. And it's a really good kind of starter kit, so to speak, before the next spring where you may be wanting to travel more independently. It also reassures parents that there's structure, that there are program leaders who speak the language or have lived in the country. There's policies around drinking. Parents feel very reassured by that, and in terms of safety for their students as well. So that's the generally typical one that's the most popular.
That makes a lot of sense. So there is such a range of different programs, organized programs, independently designed programs, and everything in between. You know, do you happen to like know kind of the cost of these, the typical cost of these various programs, or do you see that students are really designing their own as well, and maybe just working, or you know, I'm curious about
it's a mix. I had one student that really needed to work all summer and fall in order to afford an internship program he's doing down in Australia from February to June. So there's that, and usually right up front they will tell me I need to work in order to be able to pay for this GAP program. But there are ways around the high-end expensive programs. There are many, such as AmeriCorps, Student Conservation Corps, City Year, where you actually pay for travel if it's outside your own city, and they provide room and board every month, and then you receive an educational stipend at the end upon completion. So that's a more affordable way to do it. There are ways to work. A Workaway Clearinghouse is a job site. You can work as an au pair in a foreign country to earn money. Or you can do more affordable programs like EmpreCash, which was started by 2 Bowdoin graduates. And they have found very low cost, nonprofit, volunteer experiences globally that all you have to pay for is travel, and very, very cheap, like 65 cents a day, because you might be living with a homestay and then working in a school. So there are ways to make it more affordable. Generally, for the 3-month program, structured ones that I outlined earlier, that's a fairly popular first choice. They range from about $10,000 to $18,000 for 3 months. Those that are longer term, 7 to 9 month, can run from $30,000 to $55,000. But within that is Rotary, which is a 9-month program where you just pay for travel and they pay for everything else, but you have to apply during your junior year, so you have to be heads up on that. And then National Security Language Initiative is an internship paid by the state government, Secretary of State Department, and you have to apply within your junior year, by your November of your senior year, but the whole internship, travel and everything is paid for. So there are certainly ways around it.
Wow, wonderful. So we have another question. So how do you find out about the various gap year programs? So what are some good resources?
Well, generally people start with Google, and they just type in gap year and are totally overwhelmed at all the choices. They're all over the place, and it's absolutely dizzying. So the next option is to attend a gap year fair. They have them in 43 cities now across America. They came through Boulder and Denver earlier, the end of January. I really encourage students to attend them because even though there are only 40 exhibitors and there are many more out there, it's a really great opportunity to talk to GAP staff as well as some former GAP students that oftentimes are at the table to talk to students. And in addition, the Gap Year Association of America, it used to be American Gap Association, they have now changed their name. That is a terrific resource. They have links on funding, they have links on deferments, they have links on GAP advisors, they have accredited GAP programs. And then finally, GAP advisors. There are about 8 of us across the country. I'm the only one located between California and Chicago. But we are a wealth of knowledge because we know all the GAP program staff. We have vetted many of these programs. We have students that have experienced these GAP programs. We've evaluated them. So we really are experts in terms of which program is the best fit for the student.
Wow, so much information. And so these gap year fairs, you can probably just Google gap year fair, right? And that's
USA Gap Year Fair.
USA Gap Year Fair. And that's the same resource you said for a lot of this other information as well.
No, that's different. That's USA Gap Year Fair based in Worcester, Massachusetts, and they just do the gap fairs.
Got it.
The Gap Year Association of America is based in Portland, and Ethan Knight is the director there, and that's been going on for about 15, 20 years. It's a great resource.
Wonderful. Well, does anyone have any other questions that they may want to ask? This is a great time. We're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes, so I just wanted to throw it out there if there's any parents or any students that have any other questions. This is amazing and loaded with incredible opportunities. And I've had a handful of my own former students that have gone on all different kinds of gap year experiences. From one was just hiking the Appalachian Trail. One was just working locally. Another became ski patrol out in the mountains in Colorado. You know, there's so many different opportunities. I had one student who actually worked at a retreat center in Vermont, and just got to hang out and do yoga and work with. So there's so many. And then I've had many students who've done abroad programs and and everything in between. And so this is an incredible opportunity. Let's see, okay. So when do you encourage students to begin exploring different gap year options? Is sophomore year too early? So when's the ideal time to start exploring?
Sophomore year's a little bit early, but it's a good idea to kind of bake the idea, especially if a parent wants the student to do a gap year, but the student hasn't jumped on board yet. Really good time during that sophomore year to talk about it, maybe to introduce them to another gap student of a family friend who's done a gap year, to hear about it. And then junior year, probably the second half of junior year, if a student can attend a gap fair, it's a really good kind of entree into what is out there. There's no pressure to make that decision then. You can kind of go around the fair, talk to people, but not feel any pressure to, now I've got to make a decision. And then I begin working with students kind of fall of senior year, or even meet with them before school starts, because I know how busy senior fall term is with college applications. So I generally meet with them before the term or during the term. And then once those college applications are in, January 15th, I think is the latest, that is when I say now is go time to meet with students, to meet with the families, then to encourage them to attend the Gap Year Fair, which generally runs the end of January in Colorado. I do a very big presentation. It's been at Kent Denver, usually around the 20th, 21st of January. It's a precursor to the Gap Year Fair. So it's I have a 50-minute PowerPoint presentation followed up by a panel, usually a parent of Gap Year students, as well as 3 former Gap students, one who might be working, one who's currently in college, and one who might be in the middle of their gap year. And then they can speak to students themselves. And I feel like that's a really good jumping off point for people. And then by February, March, I'm starting to meet with people, sorting through and sifting through all that literature that they picked up at the Gap Fair, and they're feeling overwhelmed. How do I sort this? And that's when I really start working in terms of prioritizing, trying to match their interests and their goals for the gap year with maybe some of the programs that have risen to the top as priorities for them. And then I really encourage them to start applying by April. The more popular programs will fill up quite quickly, April, May. Usually by May 1st, the college needs to know if they're going to defer anyway. And that's when it gets really super busy because now students are really applying. By June, it may be too late on some of the more popular programs. June, July, you're really kind of cutting it close for the fall. However, I did have someone go as early as August. She decided to take a gap year. So it's doable, but the scholarship money may not be as available and spaces may have filled up. But if they're planning to do a full gap year, I don't worry about January as much then. I start talking to them about before they leave in September. Some students want to plan it out, have that all set. But most often the fall experience will impact what they decide to do come January, February, later on.
Mm-hmm. So let's see, we have another question here. So April or May of junior year or senior year?
Senior year.
Senior year, great. So
in terms of applying.
In terms of applying to the programs.
Yes, to the GAP programs.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and a really important point that Marian made was when she was talking about the benefits of gap year is one of the things that, or is that when parents aren't necessarily always on the same page with the student. Students, you would be, and the fact that 90% of students who go on gap years head right back to college, I have seen nothing but positive with the students. I've seen a handful of my students go through it, at least 10 of my students over the years that have gone through gap years, and all of them felt re-energized and knew themselves so much better, so much more dedicated to their college path. Right. And so it's just something to consider and be open to as you're exploring this process with your child. So I just wanted to mention that too, because that was such an important point that Marian made.
And in addition, I just might add for parents in particular, Bob Claggett, who was former Dean of Admissions at Middlebury, he's now, I think, College Counselor at Colorado Academy. He did a study both at UNC, University of North Carolina, and Middlebury. And the study showed that students that had taken a gap year had a higher GPA throughout their entire 4 years at college. And they finished in 4 years. The average for American students takes them 6 years to get through college. So I really view it as an investment on the front end. Take the gap year so the students are focused, ready to take advantage of that very expensive tuition, and really go through 4 years without changing majors, without transferring, and get through in 4 years and do a good job.
Wonderful, Marian. Thank you so much for the webinar and all of this valuable information. Again, Marian Taylor and Taylor the Gap LLC. Her website is taylorthegap.com. Feel free to reach out to her directly with any questions that you may have. Again, my name is Stacy Hernandez from College Counseling U, collegecounselingu.com, and we provide these free webinars in all different classes on the college admissions process. So we thank you for your time and wish you good luck as you move into all this gap year stuff soon with your clients. So yes, thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.